A man is found dead in his hotel room. No wounds, no witnesses, no signs of struggle. Just a cigarette still burning in his hand. And yet, his insides were destroyed. You're never going to guess what really happened. But by the end of this story, you'll know the chilling truth. Some stories leave questions. This one erases logic completely. By the end, you'll know the truth, but I guarantee it's not what you think it is. Before we get into it, if you're into real-life mysteries, dark content with a twist, and the kind of stories that stay with you long after they're told, so if that sounds like your thing, tap subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's get into it. On September 15th, 2010, 55-year-old Greg Flanagan checked into room 348 of the MCM Elegante Hotel in Beaumont, Texas. It was a routine work trip. He made the same drive every Monday from Lafayette, Louisiana, and stayed in the same kind of room. To Greg, it didn't matter if the hotel was fancy. He just wanted a bed, a remote, and some peace. Greg was a landman. He worked in the oil business, securing leases on mineral rights. He'd once spent years at sea as a chief engineer, but now he worked on land. He didn't exercise. He smoked like a chimney. But he was lean, sharp, and by all accounts, a quiet, dependable guy who kept to himself. That night, Greg unpacked his bag, hung up his shirts, and laid out his toiletries. He kicked off his boots, climbed into bed, turned the AC to freezing, just how he liked it, and flicked on the TV. Iron Man 2 was playing. He opened a candy bar, lit a cigarette, and that was the last anyone heard from him. The next morning, his wife Susie didn't get her usual call. Greg never missed a morning check-in. She called his mobile, nothing. Called his office, he wasn't there. Worried, she asked a few co-workers to go check on him at the hotel. When they got to room 348, Greg didn't answer the door. They brought up the manager. When the door finally opened, what they saw made no sense. Greg was lying face down on the carpet in the middle of the room. One arm was tucked awkwardly underneath him, and between the fingers of his other hand was a cigarette, burned all the way down to the filter. The room was strangely warm. Greg's skin was blue-gray. There was no blood, no signs of trauma, no indication of a struggle. His wallet was untouched, cash still inside. There were no drugs, no alcohol. To everyone present, it looked like a natural death. Detective Scott Apple was assigned to the case, a no-nonsense, fit, silver-haired guy who lived for his job. When he arrived, nothing about the scene suggested foul play. Greg had a small abrasion on his cheek, probably from falling. That was it. Apple chalked it up to a lifestyle catching up with him. Greg's wife even admitted to a bad diet, being a heavy smoker, and never went to the doctor. She'd always feared this day would come. The body was sent for autopsy. That's when everything changed. Dr. Tommy Brown, the local medical examiner, expected to find signs of a heart attack. Instead, what he found inside Greg's body was unthinkable. His insides had been destroyed, ribs broken, internal organs torn, a hole through his heart, blood and stomach contents spilled into the chest cavity. It looked like he'd been crushed, but his body showed no external injuries, no bruises, no impact marks, not even a cracked rib pressing on the skin. According to Dr. Brown, the internal damage was consistent with a high-impact trauma, like being hit by a car. But Greg had died alone, in a locked hotel room with no disturbed furniture and no weapon in sight. Dr. Brown changed the cause of death from natural to homicide. He believed Greg had been beaten to death, though he admitted even that didn't quite add up. Detective Apple reopened the case, but Greg had no enemies, no debts, no shady history. He was a quiet man in love with his wife. The only detail that stood out was this: when Greg was found, the room was hot, but he always kept it freezing cold. Something had interrupted the air conditioning. Looking into the hotel maintenance logs, Apple found a strange note. On the night Greg died, he had apparently blown a fuse while making popcorn in the microwave. That outage cut power not just to his room, but to several around it, including room 349 directly next door. The maintenance man, who did have a minor criminal record, had come up to fix it, but there was no evidence he ever entered Greg's room. Apple interviewed the guests in room 349, two electricians who were known to party hard. He suspected maybe Greg had accidentally killed their power and they retaliated, but they claimed they never even spoke to him. They'd been at the bar. They returned late, heard some coughing through the wall and went to bed. Seemed like a dead end. The case went cold. 7 months passed. Then Susie, desperate for answers, hired a private investigator, a man named Ken Brennan. Ken wasn't your typical PI. He was a former DEA agent from New York, built like a bouncer with a thick accent and a gold chain around his neck. But he had a reputation for solving impossible cases. Ken flew to Lafayette to meet Susie, then on to Beaumont to team up with Detective Apple. They revisited the crime scene. Ken asked for everything: the photos, the autopsy, the interviews, and the maintenance logs. That night, he studied every detail. The next morning, he walked into Apple's office and said, "I think I know how he died." Apple was skeptical, understandably. Ken explained his theory. First, the air conditioning. If Greg loved it cold, why was the room hot when he was found? Because when the power went out, so did the AC. When the maintenance guy restored it, the TV came back on, but not the air. Greg, assuming it was still cooling, didn't notice until it warmed up. That puts his time of death after the power was restored, but before the room got hot, likely between 8:30 and 9 p.m. Then Ken asked Susie a simple question. Did Greg smoke with his left or right hand? She didn't hesitate. Right hand, always. But when Greg was found, the cigarette was in his left. That detail changed everything. Ken believed Greg had been smoking with his right hand when something hit him, something violent. Greg panicked, stood up, and transferred the cigarette to his left hand so he could use his right to reach for the door. But he collapsed before he got there. That's how the cigarette ended up still burning in the wrong hand. Now Ken just needed to know what had hit him. Back at the hotel room, he noticed a patch on the wall, not where the door handle would hit, but slightly offset. The repair job looked too clean, suspicious. He opened the door fully. The knob didn't line up with the patch spot, so what did? Ken walked next door to room 349, looked at the shared wall, ran his hands over it, then stopped. There, stuffed into a small hole, was a glob of dried toothpaste. He pressed it in. It went straight through. They called in a forensic team. A laser was passed through the hole. It lined up exactly with where Greg's chest would have been while he sat on the bed, watching TV. Greg Flanagan had been shot. The abrasion on his crotch? That was an entry wound. The hole in his heart? A bullet path. The internal devastation? Classic ballistic trauma. But the gun? Missing. And Greg's body? Already cremated. Still, it was enough. Ken and Apple brought one of the electricians, Lance, back in, told him to sign a statement confirming he'd seen and heard nothing, just like he'd said the first time. He signed it, and then they hit him with the truth. "We know a gun was fired from your room. That bullet killed Greg. And unless you tell us who pulled the trigger, you're going down for a false statement." Lance cracked. He confessed he and his co-worker Mueller had been drinking. Mueller had a pistol. He was messing around with it in the room. Lance told him to stop. At one point, Mueller pointed it at Lance. Lance batted it away. The gun hit the floor. It fired. They heard the shot go through the wall. They froze, waited, listened. No one screamed. No one banged on the wall. They assumed, hoped. No one was in that room. Later, they returned and heard someone coughing. That convinced them no one had been hurt. The next morning, when they saw Greg's body being removed, they panicked. But then they heard Detective Apple saying it looked like a heart attack. They breathed a sigh of relief. Still, just in case, they stuffed the hole with toothpaste, hid the gun and lied to the police. Greg Flanagan died from a stray bullet fired by 2 drunk men in the room next door, and for 7 months, the world thought his body had simply shut down. In the end, Mueller was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison, all because a bullet found its way through drywall, and no one looked twice. Greg Flanagan never saw it coming. A single bullet, no sound, no warning, a quiet death, mistaken for nature taking its course. But in truth, it was 2 careless men, one stupid mistake, and a gun that never should have been there. If you want more stories like this, strange, true, and hiding in plain sight, hit subscribe and stick around. There's plenty more to uncover. And trust me, it only gets weirder. Thanks for watching Dead Curious. See you in the next one.